saw my wife on the floor bleeding, and the people responsible were the ones I called family. I was 20 minutes away with a coworker when the neighbor called, voice cracking, "Get home. Now." We ran back as fast as we could, and when I walked in I saw my wife was on the floor, blood on her lip, curled around our son. My sister stood over her with a stick. My niece, the one everyone always showed off, was on her knees, wrapped around my boy, whispering, "I'm here," and trying to shield him while her own mother was going to swing at her again. My parents sat like they were watching a sport. I ripped the stick away. I called my sister a motherfucker to her face. The whole thing was recorded. My coworker had his phone out. The neighbor had filmed earlier, and everything was copied to the cops before anyone could lie about it. It was brutal. It was undeniable. They were arrested after 30 minutes. The judge said things I still can't fully take in. They called it attempted murder, and then the list of charges kept coming. It wasn't a single slap anymore in the papers. It was everything. My sister went to prison. My parents weren't spared either. A month after the first trial, my sister's ex-husband showed up at our lawyer's office with a case file that made the courtroom fall silent. He brought police reports, bank transfers, a dark trail of text messages and witness statements that linked my sister to far worse than the beating. A cold, calculated sequence of crimes that stretched back years. People who had written it off as bad behavior were suddenly looking at a pattern. Intimidation, coercion, a missing person case that had never been solved, a suspicious death quietly labeled accidental in a different county. He'd never been able to get traction before. Local ties and family influence had buried things. But now, with my sister on record as a violent offender, and with surveillance footage from our house showing the family's cruelty, the ex-husband pushed hard. He worked with a different district attorney, one who didn't give a damn about social standing. For once, the dots connected. The DA's office charged her with multiple felonies, aggravated assault, conspiracy, tampering with witnesses, and in the most serious count, first-degree murder in a previously cold case, where new forensic work could finally place her at the scene. The prosecution framed it not as a one-time meltdown, but as sustained, escalating criminality. The tapes from our incident were put alongside other evidence to show intent, pattern, and ruthlessness. Courtroom drama is a strange kind of theater. This trial wasn't just about the day she beat my wife. It was the unspooling of years. Witnesses who'd been afraid before found courage. Old neighbors testified about threats they'd taken seriously only in hindsight. Forensic analysts testified about timelines. The jury saw the footage. They saw the pattern. They saw the victims. When the verdict came down, it was devastating. Guilty on multiple counts, including the murder charge. The judge, laying out the sentence, used language heavy enough to echo. This wasn't a moment of blind rage. It was a course of conduct that ended a life and endangered many more. The sentencing guidelines in that jurisdiction allowed for the death penalty. After the appeals and delays that any capital case brings, the court imposed the maximum sentence. In the end, the mechanism of execution, in the grim, true-to-fiction detail people asked for, followed the sentence and finality the law allowed. She was given the state's ultimate punishment. I will not lie and pretend that watching a human being receive the death penalty was a light thing. Even when that person had beaten my wife, terrorized families, and now had a murder on her record, the weight of it lodged in my chest. Nothing about it felt like glee. It felt like the system had done something our family had never been brave enough to do for others. Accept accountability completely and publicly. My parents were convicted on charges of complicity, obstruction, and child endangerment. They lost savings, property, and the social life that fed their sense of superiority. The local churches and clubs that once flashed their smiles turned away. The niece, the child who had clung to my son, was taken to protective care and eventually placed with vetted relatives who would make sure she had counseling and a stable home. And my wife? The court called her wounds for what they were. The judge's words acknowledged the attempt on her life. She got protective orders, restitution, and a legal acknowledgement that what she endured was criminal, not a private family problem. But that legal paper wouldn't erase the nights she sat awake, or the way our son flinched when a wooden spoon fell. She wanted more than apologies or money. She wanted meaning. She wanted to build something that would keep other kids from growing up without protection the way she had. One night, weeks after the final rulings, she told me softly, "If you can, help me open a home. No child should ever feel like we did, abandoned and scared. If I can save even one, it's worth it." I had been quiet about money for a reason. Years before, while everyone assumed I was scraping by, I quietly set aside income, made conservative investments, and built a small portfolio. Nobody in that family had believed I had the discipline or the foresight. They were wrong. I didn't use the money for revenge. I used it to build something that would outlast prisons and headlines. We opened the orphanage she wanted. It started small, a 3-bedroom house, cots, donated clothes, one counselor who came twice a week. The niece's new guardian helped vet volunteers. I used the funds to hire staff, secure a location with good schools nearby, and build a trauma-informed program. Therapy, tutoring, after-school care, and legal aid for kids caught in family violence. We registered it as a nonprofit, named it for no one famous, just a simple name that meant safety. The orphanage saved her as much as it saved any child. She threw herself into it with a kind of fierce, calm energy I'd never seen before. Her laugh came back slowly. The son, scarred but healing, began to learn that his home could be a place of care, not fear. The niece, who'd protected him with her small arms, grew into a volunteer when she was older, determined to make amends for the only thing she could never stop: being born into the house that did so much harm. We weren't naive. Court victories don't unsee trauma. We paid for counseling. We changed cities. We rebuilt routines. I made sure my wife had anything she asked for: security measures, funding for long-term therapy, legal support for the niece, and a say in every decision about the orphanage. I listened when she asked for quiet, and when she asked for loud action. I answered with action, not promises. Years later, the orphanage had rooms full of kids, teachers who cared, and a small scholarship fund for kids who wanted to go to college. The news columns still ran occasional pieces about the trials, but they also ran heartwarming features about kids who'd graduated high school from our program. The niece finished high school with honors and chose to study social work. My son grew into a kid who knew he was protected. People ask if violence ever justified the punishment that followed. I don't have a simple answer. I know one thing. The law ran its course, and it was the mechanism we trusted to hold them to account. I also know this: rebuilding a life after a house of cruelty took more than a verdict. It took love, stubbornness, and the hard choice to spend what I had hiding in quiet bank accounts on something that mattered. We never celebrated the ruin of my parents or the fate of my sister. There is no joy in broken lives. But there is, for us, a hard-earned peace. My wife has the orphanage she asked for. Our son is safe. The niece, once a terrified child, grows into a woman who chose compassion that day when it mattered. And the people who tried to make our lives into a spectacle had to live with the consequences of those choices in the most concrete ways the law allowed. If there's any final line I want anyone to take from this, accountability matters. The law is messy and never perfect, but in our case, it was the avenue that prevented more blood, more suffering. We used what we had, courts, evidence, and yes, money, to build something honest. In the wreckage left behind, we planted shelter and hope.